Hi everyone and welcome back to the garden. It's another mild day here, but it's another overwintering video. And today I'm talking about Colocasia esculenta. It's one of the big leaves that I use, mainly in the middle area of the garden. It really packs it out and gives it that lush jungle look. But I won't be digging up that section today, but at the far end of the garden, there's a bit of a border that didn't quite work out quite as well as I planned, and it's been absolutely battered by the storms we've had recently. So it's time to dig up some of that. And one of the plants I will be digging up is the Colocasia. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to go through how I overwinter them and a bit of a decision that I made last year about which varieties that I grow. So to clarify that last point, especially if you're new to tropical gardening, there's almost a bewildering array of different varieties of Colocasia that you can grow. Some of them look absolutely incredible, with black leaves, bright red stems, pretty much everything you can imagine. But the problem is they're not all easy to grow here and to overwinter. So my decision a couple of years ago was that until I get a proper heated greenhouse, which will happen one day down the line, I'm only going to grow the varieties that are either easy to get big in our summer heat or easy to overwinter. So the two varieties that I've chosen are Colocasia Pink China, which stays out in the ground all year and it just gets some mulch. But to be honest with you, if you absolutely just leave it as it is, it should be fine pretty much anywhere in the country. Other than the sort of highlands of Scotland, really cold places, you should be absolutely fine leaving Pink China in the ground. The other variety that I grow is Colocasia esculenta, which is the standard sort of common Colocasia. Bright green leaves, really big, and it does size up well. And that's the main reason that I grow it. Because so many of these other fancy varieties with the amazing colours, you see the pictures online, if you Google them, they look absolutely incredible. But unfortunately, I've found they just don't perform well with our summer heat. This year especially, it's been a really cool summer, and what you find is a lot of the pictures you see online, they're in places that have got warmer summers, America, Central Europe, and that's really the heat that these plants need to thrive. Yes, I have grown some of the different kinds, a couple of the different black varieties, and yes, they look nice, but they're never quite as incredible as you want them to be. Whereas Colocasia esculenta and Pink China, they're just really good performers. And the other thing is, you'll see later on how I overwinter esculenta, but these other fancier varieties, I find they're a lot trickier to overwinter. If you cut them back, let them go dry, make them go dormant, they take a lot of heat and a lot of time to really get going again. And if you want to keep them as a houseplant, sure, that's fine, if you've got the heat and humidity to keep them going, but it takes up valuable space inside. Personally, I don't have a huge amount of space, so anything that I can store easier is definitely a good plant I want to grow. So before we get too far into it, let's just take you on a quick walk through and show you the Colocasia that I've got in the ground. The gunnery there still looking amazing, still doing its thing. Deciduous trees now turning yellow, that's a cherry tree up there. And here you'll see there's a small Pink China, the one that I grew in water. But these big leaves here, these are Colocasia esculenta. So as you can see here, even in a cooler summer, in this shadier spot, got plenty of trees overhead, they still perform pretty well. And that leaf there, you can see it's pretty decent size. So they're definitely a great focal plant in any kind of exotic garden, and they're a great foliage plant to mix in with the cannas, with the tree ferns, bamboos. I think they really fit in with that exotic jungle vibe. I'll tell you what, if you were here now, you can definitely smell autumn. That scent of sort of dampness, the leaves starting to decay. I make it sound bad, but it's actually a really nice smell. And if you look up there, you'll see the leaves now. Most of them are just starting to fall off a tree. It really is an incredible time of year. And I like the contradiction between having big tropical leaf plants like the Colocasia at the same time as seeing these yellow leaves. It really makes the garden, it sort of gives it a sense of the seasons, even though it's got an exotic vibe. And I really like that. But anyway, stop rambling. Time to get back to Colocasia. And I thought before I talk about the exact method that I use to overwinter Colocasia esculenta, it is a nice easy method, I thought it'd be easier to tell you about the reasons why I don't use other methods, and that's probably best done in the format of questions. So question one, you might just have to ignore that plane droning away over there. Question one could quite easily be, will I get away with overwintering Colocasia esculenta in the ground here in the UK? And to that, I can't really give a definite answer. It honestly depends where you are in the country. If you live on the south coast, London, those two places I keep mentioning, but really anywhere that doesn't really see cold winters, even in an average winter, temperatures don't dip much below freezing and you don't get that real deep cold, then you might have a chance, especially if you've got quite well-drained soil, because these are plants that don't like being cold and wet, so in a lot of the country you might actually struggle. In those places, if you want to leave it in the ground, I would really recommend Colocasia Pink China as a tougher alternative that will be alright in the ground. Obviously now, climates are changing, and here we're starting to notice a knock-on effect in our gardening seasons. One of the results of that is that plants like salvias, plants like dahlias, they can be left in the ground now for most of the country. Plants like cannas now, Potentially you can leave them again in most places now. In a mild winter, an average winter, they should be absolutely fine. But I think personally that Colocasia esculenta is probably that next level up of sort of tropicalness. It doesn't quite have the hardiness of those others. So personally, most of the country, I wouldn't leave them in the ground, and I don't think you have a great chance of them making it. I suppose another factor that affects it is that they do need to be kept on the drier side if they are staying outside and it is cold. And unfortunately, most Colocasia, they thrive and they grow best in a moist spot. So you've got a bit of a contradiction where they're going to grow best in a spot that's moist in summer. We've got plenty of water to keep the summer growth going, but then that same place is likely to be even wetter in winter. So that's probably the main reason why I personally wouldn't leave them in the ground in winter. Question 2 could be then, can I get away with overwintering Colocasia esculenta in a frost-free polytunnel or greenhouse? And the answer is maybe. I like to get away with these non-committal answers, but chances are that Colocasia, it'll just be too wet and too cold for too long. I have tried it in the past, sometimes you can get away with it, but a lot of the time, even though that environment is frost-free, it's still less than 10 degrees for months on end, and those really aren't the sort of conditions that a Colocasia esculenta needs. Really, it needs to be in either active growth or completely dry, and that's where my method of storing actually comes in. If you're wondering then, can I overwinter my Colocasia esculenta as a houseplant, then the answer is absolutely yes. And in fact, that's how I used to overwinter mine. At the old house, we had a conservatory tacked onto the end of the house. It wasn't massively warm in there, but it was a good bit warmer than a frost-free polytunnel. And I think that's the secret. If you got a bit more warmth, then that plant's in active growth. And when plants are growing, they're not rotting. Especially plants like Colocasia, anything with a tube or comma or bulb, I think you need to keep them just warm enough to stop that soil temperature getting really cold, really damp, because that's what causes them to fail. So I had a lot of success doing that, and it was especially good at the end of the year when you had a really big plant. There was a couple of times when I was really proud of how big they got in the summer. That way I could just put them into a pot, keep them there. I didn't water them a lot during the winter, maybe every couple of weeks or so, just to keep it from drying out. I just kept them ticking over, then the following May they could go back outside again. That is a fantastic way of overwintering them, and if you've got somewhere even warmer, if you've got a massive bathroom that's well lit, good humidity, then you can water it even more. They make a fantastic houseplant. But the problem is they take up a lot of space, and if you grow a lot of exotics, if you're anything like me, then you prioritise the space inside for the rarer plants, the even more tender ones, and the plants like the Insetti that wouldn't have a chance of being stored another way. So that's where my method comes in, that I'll show you now. I basically dry store my Colocasia esculenta. It's so easy, it doesn't take up a lot of space, and I'll show you how we do it now. So you're probably wondering then, when should you dig up your Colocasia esculenta and bring it inside? Again, another non-committal answer. It completely depends on what the winter brings that year. Some winters we can have the first week of October, 2 degrees and sleet, like we did a few years ago. Other winters like this one, we're now late November and I still haven't brought hardly anything inside, so it completely depends. And I suppose worst case, the leaves could take a light frost before you actually dig up the bit underground. As long as there's no deep cold and you don't leave it out for most of winter, you should be absolutely fine. So really any time from October through to November, that'll be what I'd recommend. And although it's important to leave every plant out for as long as you possibly can, I try to coordinate things so I can get everything in one hit. It just makes it easier. You're only getting muddy once, you're only digging up a border once. It's just a more straightforward way of doing things. And this year, as we haven't had any real cold yet, that's why I haven't really started anything. So maybe next weekend, probably a couple of weeks time, I'll have a look at the forecast, and if I decide I'm going to go for it, I will go for it and get everything inside, and that's when the Colocasia will be looked after. So let's go through now how I dig one up. There's one in the border behind me there, just mixed in. I'll show you how I dig it up, which isn't really much of an explanation. I pretty much dig it up without damaging the corm itself, and then how I prepare it for winter. For preparing your Colocasia for winter then, all you need is a spade and a knife. That is literally all you need to keep them through winter and get them ready for spring. Now, the Colocasia I'm going to dig up is in the middle of this border here, and you can sort of see why I'm going to plan to actually change this round next year. It's gone full jungle and not in a really good way. And the problem is, I dumped all these plants in. I didn't really give this part of the garden as much consideration as a bit in the middle. And also, the winds are really strong from that direction. So if you've subscribed to my channel, there'll be a few videos coming up as I make some changes to this area over the next few months. I definitely want to get some more evergreens in to slow that wind down. And then I've got a few different plans on how I'm going to plant it up next year. So what I'll do now, I'll get the Colocasia dug up out the ground. I'll probably just put some music over this, maybe some sad but slightly dramatic music to really show the somber reality that I'm taking the first part of my tropical garden puzzle apart for this year. So it's definitely a sad time, but I'm going to get the spade in and get the Colocasia out. bit of digging then and some wiggling the soil off, the colocasia is out of the ground. And this one, you can see, you might be surprised, I know I was actually a little bit, by just how small the part under the ground is. And sometimes you see colocasias for sale. I know I got some about 4 years ago that were literally the size of turnips, the size of Swedes, and you would assume that the larger the piece you're starting with, the bigger the leaves will be. And unfortunately, that isn't always a reality. But one downside of there only being quite a small corm or bulb is that that part there, it's not necessarily going to make it through winter as well as a larger one. There just isn't the reserves there, the energy to keep it going. But I will still dry store this one. If this was your only plant, personally, I would be tempted to chop some of the leaves off and actually keep it going as a house plant. But this is a sort of spare one, really. A lot of the plants in this section are multiples, divisions from previous years that I just chucked in there to fill this area up this year. So what I'm going to do is just show you how I dry store it, and it literally is as simple as you can possibly imagine. Get the knife out your pocket, if you can get it out without ripping your finger off. And this might seem like sacrilege, but basically go somewhere about 3 inches above the bulb and chop it straight off. There we go. Now those bits will be going in the compost heap or going straight into the ground to compost down, and this is what you're left with. Now what you can do is actually trim all these roots off, and you'll see there that's your actual bulb or corm in the middle there. I'm sure technically it is one of those two, but I didn't research that before doing this video. But if you trim all those roots off there, if you cut the stem back maybe a little bit more, then just leave it somewhere in your house to dry out. I just leave them on a side in the spare room, on a piece of newspaper, and pretty much just leave them to it. The top bit will shrivel up, these new shoots here, they might shrivel down a little bit, and the bulb will get a little bit smaller. But then, come next February, March time, maybe March, just to shorten the season a little bit, I'll pot it up, give it some heat, and it will come into growth. They really are that easy to overwinter. Chop it down, dig it up, dry it out, leave it, pot it up again, and it goes. And the problem with the fancier colocasia I mentioned, the black leaf ones, the bright pink ones, is that they take a lot more heat to get going. And personally, I'm not especially interested in a plant that I try to get going in March, but it doesn't send out more than 2 leaves until August time. Whereas these esculenta, they don't need as much heat to get going, and they are reliable. Once they do get growing, they grow pretty quickly. So that is pretty much it for my overwintering method of colocasia. I don't know how I managed to drag this video out for so long, but somehow I did. Nice and simple, dig it up, chop it back, bring it inside, leave it dry. Basically, it's as simple as that. So if you've got any questions about this, leave them in the comments below. Other than that, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Back again, just had a quick Google, and it turns out colocasia are bulbs. I wasn't reasonably sure, I just wanted to have a quick check before I actually said it. But I think it's amazing that something this size, you can just overwinter it with absolutely no care, no technique whatsoever. Just start it off in your windowsill again next year in a polytunnel or greenhouse, and from something this size, you can have leaves like this by the end of next year. And the good thing about colocasia is, as they get bigger, you can divide more off them. So this was actually a small division last autumn, and already it's grown to have leaves of its own this size. So I think that's pretty incredible. If yours is actually smaller than this at the end of the year, then personally I might be tempted to overwinter it as a house plant just to keep it growing rather than to dry store it. But if it's anything bigger, dry storing is definitely the way to go. Thanks again for watching, I'll see you next time.